Morning, everybody. I'm Don Dickson, and I'm real happy to be back with you. We're in the midst of a study, a master class on all of the different types of structure. We've been through the three major types of bars, and we, over the last few sessions, talked about the 5 different types of humps. One of my favorite structures to fish. Reason being that humps have deep water on 4 sides as opposed to the bars, which are 3-sided, 2-sided, or 1-sided. So if you've been following along, you know I love humps, and we gave a couple of examples, or we gave one example the last time we talked, about one of the types of humps being a deep water hump. First of all, we discussed about what it took for it to qualify as a productive structure. And then I told a little story that happened up in New York when we were promoting the Finger Lakes years ago. And it was such a wonderful time. And that one little deep hump that we found, it sort of helped us to promote all of Western New York. And they're just great structures. And when we left off after that discussion, I said in our next get together I was going to talk about a mid-lake hump and a situation that took place again a few years ago that sort of emphasizes the importance of these structures. But after I thought about it for a little bit, we had talked somewhat about saddles being the same as a deep water hump. But I didn't give you any examples of a saddle. And there's one saddle in particular that pretty much created almost a whole new identity for me over a 20-year period. And it was such an important structure, and because I hadn't actually given an example of a saddle that was so important to me, I thought I'd tell you about that first today. And I'll leave that mid-lake hump until the next time we talk. I already figured that if I told you about this saddle today, it would take me so long that I wouldn't have time to do the mid-lake hump. So we'll hold that to the next time, but today I'm going to tell you about a saddle. I'm going to tell you how we arrived at this spot and how important it was, not only to me, but to the evolution, I should say, of not only Buck's original material, but all of his advanced material. It did so much to further the awareness, deep water, home of the fish, the importance of having targets in deep water to fish in order to be successful. Not just catching fish, but catching a lot of big fish. So before we leave this deep hump idea, I'm going to give you an example of this saddle. And it all took place in 1979, as my grandson told me the other day, in a land far, far, far away, a long, long, long time ago. But the good news is, as we talked earlier in our first discussions, fish haven't changed in 2,000 years. They haven't ever changed. They're the same now as they were then. So nothing's changed. How they operate and so on and so forth, what they'll do, what they won't do, how they're affected by weather and water conditions, none of that's changed. So an example from 79 or 99 or 2007, it's all the same. It doesn't make any difference. At any rate, here's how it all started. I had spent 7 years with Buck, traveling all over the United States, fish at all different species, all different weather and water conditions all over the country. And he finally said, okay, I think we're ready to do this. So he advertised it in Fishing Facts magazine, and we were going to have this big summer school, and it was going to take place in Canada. I'd never been to Canada. I didn't know nothing about fishing in Canada and in the Lake of the Woods and all of this stuff that people were talking about. I knew nothing about it. But yet I had learned my lessons. I had learned all my lessons. And I had experienced pretty much everything that's in this book, somewhere or another. So Buck said, okay, you're ready. We're ready to hold this school, but I'm not going to be there. I said, okay. So he advertised it. And it was going to take place over an 8-week period in a place in Canada where I've never been. Not only hadn't I been to the system, the river system, and the Lake of the Woods, I'd never been to Canada. So he said, well, don't worry. And of course I had my partner with me at that time, Tommy Frenzy. And I should mention right here, some people have been asking me, and it's kind of hard for me to still, even right now, to talk about it, but Tommy passed away this year, suddenly. And he was the most active 74-year-old guy I ever saw. He was still a scratch golfer. He's still very active, fishing all the time. And all of a sudden one day, he just sort of became numb and kind of paralyzed, especially in his back. So they took him into the hospital and they told him he had heart problems. He needed to deal with it. So they were going to operate the next day. And I got the call. He never came out of there. He died that day. It kind of hit me yesterday in church, Easter Sunday. I'm a Christian. Most of you know that. Tommy was a Christian. His Bible was so worn, it was more worn than my grandmother's Bible, and I'm not kidding. He was in that Word every day. And yesterday it hit me, after all the music was over, that yes, Christ was crucified, dead, and buried, but he arose from the dead. And because Christ showed himself to 550 people after he came out of that tomb, we know it's a fact. And because Christ lives, so does Tommy. So yesterday I had a smile on my face, and it was okay that I could mention it today for everybody who's been asking me. Tommy's alive. He's just not here, but he's alive. Okay, so Buck says, I don't know what you're all concerned about. I know you've never been up there, but I got you a contour map. He said, you can study that map, and then you go up there and put this thing together. He said, but we need to have maps and some detailed maps of some structure that we can use. And he said, what I'm looking for when the students come up there, and we had over 600 students, 50 to 75 coming every week, something like that. So we had a bunch of people coming, all coming from the States. He said, so they're coming, and these are people that are really serious about their fishing. They're not like somebody that's looking for a guide to take them out for a day and cook them a shore lunch. They're looking to learn how to do what we do. So he said, in order for us to have a successful school, we need to have all different types of structure that exist in this watershed, and the ones that reflect the best what we teach. So you got to find really good humps, you got to find maybe a saddle, you got to find bars and so on and so forth. You got to find good structure. Narrow ridge-like bars, you need to find some big broad bars where you do a lot of trolling, but good training spots, that's the key thing. So he said, I need you to map. He said, I think about 25-mile radius. Do some detailed maps of some structures so you can decide which ones are the best that you can use in training. And I got to thinking, fuck, 25 miles radius? How many lakes are there? Is there one lake, two lake, river? What's that? He said, well, why don't you take a look at this contour map and then you'll have an idea. But you got about 2 weeks is all you got, and you got to put this together. And he said, you got to have the right spots to do the training. And he said, once you pick the best, maybe 20 or 25 or 30 structures, he said, I want you to take and draw them out, detail maps of them. And then we're going to reprint that whole thing, and we'll pass them out to the people when they arrive. Well, I said, hey, you're not coming up to help with that work? He said, no, you can handle it. So I looked at my partner, I said, Tommy. And Tommy just shook his head a little bit. And we kind of smiled. And then Buck said, well, but don't worry. I got you this contour map. And he said, take a look at it. And you get that head start, and then you go out there and get the job done. But you got 2 weeks, that's it. So in order for me to show you this map, I'm going to have to stand up. Because I want you to have the full effect of what I was looking at back then. He said, this is a map of the area. Wait a minute, I got to go like that first. And he said, yeah, there it is. I said, man, look at that lake down there. That's a big one. Look at all these lakes. He said, I thought there were going to be 1 or 2 lakes, maybe 3 lakes. He said, no, it's Lake of the Woods. He said there's lakes everywhere, as far as you can see, in all directions, hundreds of miles of nothing but lakes. And it's all tied together with the Winnipeg River, which is one of the few rivers he mentioned that heads north. So I said, well, that's an awful lot of water. Then I realized I didn't have the entire map open. So I had to open it up all the way. This is what we were looking at. I said, wait a minute. You said we got 2 weeks? Did you mean we got 2 years or 2 weeks? But that was the map that he showed us. Okay, so now that you've seen this monster, I'm going to fold it back up, put it away. And Tommy and I, once we left Buck, we started laughing. That's all we could do. He expects us to map that huge area of water in 2 weeks. And because Buck was such a perfectionist, we knew that we could never, ever, we couldn't fool him. We couldn't just pretend that we mapped it. We had to go map it. Because we just knew. If we did, somehow, he would know. So we went up there with the idea, we're going to map it and work hard. And the good news was daybreak to dark up there. It didn't get dark till midnight, 11 o'clock. So we could literally work for 18 hours a day to map this silly place. And then once we had it completed, we were supposed to prepare this book of maps, individual structures for the students to go fishing when they weren't in a training session. So it all made sense. It was a good plan, except it would have taken 10 really good mappers and good fishermen probably 3 months to map the water he wanted to have mapped. So we finally decided, Tommy and I finally decided, listen, we can only do what we can do. We're going to work hard, try to please the boss, but we can only do what we can do. So we went and started off, we of course took our individual boats and got up there to Canada. And after we did in fact study the map, we had some ideas, but our overall thought was, let's try to find some really good stuff relatively close to the lodge so that we didn't have to spend a lot of time running back and forth, traveling a long distance to train some people, because we could only take so many on the water at one time. And we had a big group of people, and we wanted to get with everybody every day, at least for a time, for an hour. So with the idea of trying to find some stuff relatively close, I started thinking, okay, if this is the entire Lake of the Woods, I mean, I got lakes the size of my home lake here, they're all over the place. There's hundreds of them. And because the walleye is a seasonal migrator, and we talked about that in my blog not too long ago, the seasonal migration of walleye. Sometimes they'll go as far as 100 miles. So all of a sudden, I put it together that all of the Lake of the Woods water comes together into the Winnipeg River, and right outside of our big resort, I witnessed that all of the above water terrain came together at a railroad trestle, and it was only at that spot maybe 75 yards wide. And it ran for a little ways like that, and then it opened back up again into all of these lakes, Sand Lake, Little Sand Lake, Rough Rock, all of the huge water that goes from there. And I started thinking, okay, it's a walleye river. They're seasonal migrators. At one time or another, all the walleyes in that system have to come through that one little spot. They're passing through one way or the other. They're going or they're coming. But they're passing through a spot that's only 75 yards wide. Okay, I better look right there. see if I don't have some structure right there, because if we hit it right as far as the seasonal movements of the fish, we're there way after the spawn. So it's going to be a crapshoot as to whether or not they're going to be coming through there at the time we're planning on doing this summer school. But it was certainly worth looking. So I go down under that train trestle, and wouldn't you know, there's 55 water upstream from it, or downstream rather. There's 60 foot of water on the other side. And there was this beautiful three-sided bar came out right underneath that train trestle. It was clean as a whistle. You could fish that thing all day long, but you had to troll it, because since all of that water was congregating right in that one little spot, there was a heavy current, about 12 miles an hour. And so you couldn't sit and cast it, which I'd have liked to have been able to do, but you couldn't. You had to troll it. And because it's river and the current would swing, you couldn't troll it like you would normally go out around and follow the break line. You couldn't do that, because the current would throw your lure, it would throw your boat. Best troller in the world couldn't do it. You just had to make straight line passes up the river, cross over the bar, but the bar was breaking in 4 different locations. It was terrific. 25, I think, 37, 42, and 47 feet into 60 feet of water up the end. I mean, textbook, except you had to troll it, and you had to make straight line passes up over the bar. Well, I mapped that out, and I thought I'd put a lure down and just make a couple passes, see if there's any fish on it. Well, first fish I caught was 7-pound walleye on a first pass, right over that bar. Oh, ooh, okay. We got something right here already. So I put my rod down, no more fishing, already established. This is a productive structure, so I knew that. But I wanted to follow the break lines and see what else I had in this expansive area where it necked down. Because that neck down section, distance-wise, was about a half a mile before it opened back up into all the myriad of lakes and so on and so forth. So in that distance, I wanted to find out if there's anything else there. So I started following the shallowest break line, which was 25 feet, followed all the way down to where it opened up. So that was all there was there. So then I had another little break line at 35 feet. So I started following the 35, and all of a sudden it turned out. It came up pretty sharp at 35, but when I turned back to the 35, all of a sudden I saw 32. It was getting shallower, even though I was turning out into the middle of the lake or river. So as I turned out, I kept following that 35 and breaking, 35 and breaking. And all of a sudden, I'm over to the other side of the river. Ooh, what do we have here? Do we have a saddle? Let me see. So I just looped the boat back up around and got in that 60 feet of water, came up over to 35 and kept going straight, heading straight. It came 35, be with me now, it came 35, 32 feet, 32 feet, 32 feet for 100 yards. Maybe not, 75 yards, 32 feet. And I kept on going, kept on going, kept on going. Is that all we had was this one little hole in the bar? But I kept on going, 32 feet, and all of a sudden 35, 37 feet, 42 feet, 47 feet, and breaking to 60 feet of water. Oh. 60 feet of water, 60 feet of water, 32 feet on top, but yet connected to the shore, both shorelines. Folks, I had a big, beautiful underwater island, a saddle that connected to the shoreline on the 2 sides, 60 feet of water here, 60 feet of water upstream, and it was breaking. It crowned at 32 feet. Remember last week we talked about D-pumps. It crowned at 32 feet. I said we fish them the same way, but 32 feet crown, 32 foot crown, breaking at 37 feet, strong, 37 to 42. 42, 42, 42, breaks again, 42 to 47, 5 foot break, definite. And then as I heading into, with the 47, heading into the 60 feet, 47, 47, 47, 60. 3 beautiful break lines. So now, wow, this is something I can fish under any weather and water conditions with the expectation of catching fish. When a fish become active and move, especially in a walleye river, man, this is like finding gold. And the funniest part, I'm looking right there's the lodge. I'm right outside the front door of the lodge. I couldn't believe it. So I get on the break lines. I follow all the break lines. Then I go downstream over the shallower break lines to the downstream side, and all those deeper break lines are down there as well, breaking into 60 feet. So I get a chance to catch fish on that side. Let's say that this table is my saddle. Upstream, downstream. I have a chance to catch fish on both sides because the break lines are so beautiful. But as I really did my detail map, because I'm still mapping now, I found me a hot spot. I don't even have to put a lure down there. I already know. This place is dynamite. Not only do I have a saddle, but it actually, with the deeper break lines, connects into that beautiful bar that's under the trestle. Man, it was like God was saying, oh, you don't have to go running all over the place. Just sit right here a minute and see what we have for you right here. You know, it was like too perfect. So that night when I met back up with Tommy, I told him, I said, brother, I said, we got a spot. You're not going to believe it. It's right outside our doorstep. I got a deep saddle crowning at 32 feet that breaks off at 37, 42, and 47 feet into 60 feet of water on both sides. I said, and the upstream side is fishable where you can actually troll it. Even though there's a current, you can do a good job of trolling because I tried. And keep your lure in position. And then it swings around and ties into that bar, and I can promise you, we're going to catch a lot of fish right here. So I said, I know we're not fishing right now, we're mapping, but we're marking this down. I mean, we're going to train on a bar, we're going to train on a saddle, and we also want people to catch fish. That makes for a good week. It makes for a happy camper, you know. So, all that being said, Tommy and I went on about for the next week and a half. We mapped every darn spot pretty near on that map. At least well enough to know where we were going to spend most of our time. But I was real anxious, and we saved the saddle that I had found that was right outside the door. We knew, since it was so close, that A, we were going to use it for training no matter what. But we hadn't really established, even though I caught that first fish there the first day, hadn't really established that the seasonal movements were going to cooperate enough that we're going to have fish in there for the duration of our school. And we started fishing that hump, and we fished all of the break lines. By the time we were down at that 47 foot and following along, and at the 47 foot there was about 3 or 4 major fingers stuck out, breaking into 60 feet. This was on the train trestle side of the saddle, that I could actually troll it angling upstream and follow this thing. And when it finally, there was a little turn and a wash out, and once you hit that wash, 47 feet, it turned sort of back out and upstream, and then you could swing out and hit the bar at 47 feet under the trestle. We fished for about 2 hours, keeping in mind we were going to keep some fish for the first group and have a walleye dinner. And the limit, I think our limit was 6. I'm pretty sure it was 6. We kept like 12 fish. And I'm going to show you a picture of those 12 fish. This is what a saddle can do for you, especially if you're in walleye country and you run into a structure like this, 32 feet, breaking on both ends, both sides of it to the deep water at 37, 42, and 47 feet. Beautiful. Where you can see the above water terrain, all of a sudden it necks down this whole watershed, necked down into this one little 75 yards and went for a little distance and then opened back up again. You almost know for sure before you look there's a saddle there. And what a structure that was. Just like finding that deep hump we talked about last time. Under the worst weather, you could always catch some fish. And I don't know how many times in our 20 years up there in the summer that the fish became active, but became active in 42 feet of water, 47 feet of water. You could catch one every pass, bang, 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 and a school of fish in one spot, back and forth, just keep catching them. but yet they never moved any shallower. They never got up to the 37, much less the crown of the saddle. So when you discover the deep hump, the deep saddle, it's almost like you're guaranteeing yourself, assuming you learn your mapping interpretation and your presentation of lures at deep water on exact spots. You ensure yourself of pretty much catching fish every time you go, regardless of the weather. The worst conditions, you can go catch some fish. Now, I'm going to close with this. Buck says. This is a Buck says. He used to tell everybody that called him with a question pretty much the same thing. He'd say, listen, if you're not catching fish, and this is just how it said, you ain't fishing deep enough. That's just the bottom line. If you're not catching, you ain't fishing deep enough. How come guys don't fish out in the deep water? And his answer was simple, concise, and it was the real reason. He said, because people don't have a target to throw to. They turn around in the boat. Here they got all these rocks and these weeds and stuff, stumps and stick-ups they could throw to. They got targets. They turn around a boat like I am right now, looking out here on this water. You can't see any targets out there. So therefore, they don't go. But there are targets in deep water. And that's what this whole study is about. See, my whole reason for doing this, I want you to catch more and bigger fish. And if you're trying to do that and you're serious about it, you can't do it unless you pinpoint those fish in deep water. You've got to find those deep water targets. And what are those deep water targets? They're structure. Structure, breaks, and break lines. We'll talk about more breaks and break lines later. But the features on the bottom of the lake that we can identify. Today we're identifying a saddle. And we're identifying the break lines that existed that formed that saddle. 37 feet, 42 feet, 47 feet. Those are the three spots, those three targets that you and I have got to fish. We can't just go out and fish deep water. I've said it over and over and over for 40 years. I never fish deep water. People misunderstand this all the time. They say, you're always fishing deep water. No, I never fish deep water. I only fish deep structure. I'm fishing a target. Otherwise, I'm wasting my time. You go out there and just fish deep water, you're never going to catch fish. You have to have a target. And the targets the fish use that they can see, we can see too. You can see those targets, you can identify them, and then you can, as long as you're schooled in casting and trolling, you can physically put a lure on those features, and that's where you run into the fish. We're fishing deep targets, just like that saddle I talked about, which produced over the years thousands of fish in the 8, 9, 10 pound class, thousands. And that catch that I'm showing you right now with my partner that I miss very much, Tommy Frenzy. He and I caught that stringer that morning. And there was 12 fish, I believe it was 12 fish, it may have been 10. But those fish weighed like 90 pounds. 90 pounds. I think one fish was 12 pounds. You could see, they're hogs. And every fish was caught on those deep targets. The breaks and the break lines on the structure, on the saddle. Okay, so I know it was long-winded today, but I wanted to get that most important discussion out of the way on saddles, especially in river systems, especially for walleye. With all that being said, please like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we'll see you the next time.